My wife and I went for a medical checkup, and they discovered she had stomach cancer. I went home to my parents wanting to sell her house to save her. But my mother told me, I can give you the property deed, but on one condition, first tell her it's you who has stomach cancer. I didn't understand my mother's words, but to save my wife, I did as she said. That very night, my mother-in-law rushed to our home, urging me to divorce, so I wouldn't drag her daughter down. My wife also told me that if you truly love someone, you shouldn't delay the rest of their life. I stared blankly at my wife, unable to believe she could say such things. From the very beginning, I understood what my mother was thinking. She wanted to test our relationship to see if my wife was worth selling our family home to save. I'd even convinced myself that our love was stronger than gold, certain it could withstand any trial. Only now do I understand how right our ancestors were. Husband and wife are like birds in the same forest, but when disaster strikes, each flies their own way. Seeing me stunned into silence, my wife said to me with utmost sincerity, "Do you know how difficult cancer treatment really is? You can look it up online. Families fighting cancer often end up spending all their money only to lose their loved one anyway." My mother-in-law couldn't wait to chime in exactly. To save you, we'd have to sell our house and car, borrow money everywhere, and still fail in the end. What would happen to my daughter after you're gone? I always treated my mother-in-law with respect, but this time I ignored her completely, looking straight into my wife's eyes. I asked solemnly, "Is that really what you think?" My wife said, "I hope you want to be too selfish and can consider me too." I asked, "Do you think wanting to live is a selfish thing?" My wife sighed and said, "I only know that if I were the one with cancer, I definitely wouldn't burden you. I'd divorce you and choose to face it alone." I fell into silence. My mother-in-law wiped her tears and said to me, "I know you feel wrong, but what has my daughter done wrong? She is still so young. How will she live the rest of her life?" It suddenly occurred to me that maybe my mother-in-law was right. I'm still young. If I spend all our family savings trying to save my wife and still fail, how am I supposed to live the rest of my life? At that moment, my wife suddenly handed me the divorce papers. A chill ran through me. I had just broken the news to her, and yet she already had the divorce papers ready. I picked up the agreement to look it over, but what I saw left me stunned. This is practically an exploitative contract. After the divorce, not only would half the cash be divided, but the property would also go to my wife, leaving me with just a car. I suspect if she knew how to drive, I wouldn't even be able to keep this car. My wife said, "If you don't see any issues, sign it, and then we'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to finalize the divorce." I said, "Do you think this contract is fair? The house was bought by my family. Why should it go to you if we divorce?" My mother-in-law quickly interjected, "Do you remember what I made very clear when you married my daughter, that you had to have an apartment to get married?" I replied, "I remember, but aren't we getting divorced now?" The mother-in-law said anxiously, "This house is my daughter's security. It's precisely for unexpected situations after marrying you. Now that you're actually sick, it's perfectly reasonable for us to take this security." I gasped in shock, never imagining that the security they mentioned before marriage actually meant this. The betrothal gifts were security. The house was security too. If I cheat, she takes the security. If I die from illness, she still takes the security. When risks arise, she takes all the benefits. What's left for me then? I said angrily, "No way. I want to give you the house. I'm just sick. I'm not at fault here. Why should I give it to you?" My wife gazed at me sorrowfully and said sadly, "You want to even give me this one last gift." In the past, when she spoke to me with that pitiful expression, it only made my heart ache. But this time I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of gift is this to see someone as property when they're ill and shamelessly call a gift? Seeing how resolute I was, my mother-in-law softened her tone and said, "Listen to me, giving this house to my daughter, just for our sake. If anything were to happen to you, wouldn't someone still need to take care of your parents?" My wife quickly added, "Yes, I can help take care of your parents in the future." I stared at her coldly at this point. I wouldn't believe a word she said. Before we got married, she already made it clear she wouldn't live with my parents. That's why we bought this house in the first place. Now, she claims she'll take care of them in the future. How could I possibly believe her? I scoffed and said, "My parents don't need your care." My wife nodded and said, "Fine, then we'll settle this in court." I gasped in shock and said to her in disbelief, "Now that you know I have stomach cancer, you still want to take me to court?" My mother-in-law said impatiently, "You don't understand polite talk. Do you? Must we spell out the ugly truth? You're already sick. If we drag out litigation for years, will wear you down. Do you really think you can hold on to these assets?" She grew increasingly agitated, even pointing her finger at my nose as she continued, "When you die, eventually it'll just be your elderly parents fighting us in court. Do you really think we're afraid of them?" Anger burned fiercely in my heart. This whole family is a pack of ungrateful wolves. To think I once considered selling our old home to save her life. My wife said, "Mom, don't argue with her. Let me have a heart-to-heart talk with him." She took my hand, her face the very picture of sincerity. But this face I once adored now fills me with nothing but disgust. My wife said earnestly, let us put ourselves in each other's shoes, okay? If I were the one who got sick today, I'd leave most of our assets to you too, because I want you to take care of my parents after I'm gone. My mother-in-law quickly added, see, look at how selfless my daughter is, and look at yourself, aren't you ashamed? What kind of thoughts fill your head all day? I replied I was thinking about how couples should face hardships together. My wife shook her head and said that is such a naive thing to say. I asked how is that naive? She replied the idea of spouses weathering hardships together sounds fine on the surface, but when you get down to it, you're dragging me along to endure your personal crisis. If I stay with you, I'll waste my youth, drain my savings, and end up old and penniless when you pass away without a care, leaving me with nothing. Is that what you want? Listening to my wife's words, each one felt like a knife stabbing into my heart. I had thought that since she was ill, I would spare no effort to save her no matter the cost, but it never occurred to me that if it were me who fell sick, her first thought would be about being a burden. I sighed and said sorrowfully, how can there be talk of burden between husband and wife? We made vows to each other that neither poverty nor sickness would ever part us. My wife shook her head and said, you're oversimplifying things. Let me tell you what terrible things will happen if we don't get divorced. I don't understand how this became about being terrifying, but my wife said with utmost seriousness, at first, I'll stay by your side through the treatment. But as time goes on, our savings will dwindle until we're drowning in debt, forced to sell our house. And Carr, do you really think our life would still be bearable then? I didn't respond, instead beginning to visualize the scenario she described. She continued by, then you'd be too weak to even walk, and I'd have to carry you to the hospital with no car left. I'd need to haul you on a buses during storms and rain. Maybe I'd even have to clean your piss and shit day after day of that life. Wouldn't you feel guilty? I couldn't help saying there's still hope with treatment. If we just push through this crisis, our future might still turn around. Seeing me still arguing back, my wife suddenly said, but why should I gamble the rest of my life on a probability? A simple sentence, yet it chilled my heart completely. My wife continued, if we win the bet, fine. But what if we lose? If we lose, I'll have sacrificed my entire lifetime. You keep talking about facing it together, but that just selfishness from start to finish. You've only been thinking about making me pay the price. As she spoke, she actually began crying, sobbing out, I'm human too, before thinking about your own survival. Why don't you consider that I'm just a person too? I also want to have an ordinary, happy life. My mother-in-law quickly handed my wife a tissue to wipe her tears. Patting my wife's shoulder, she comforted her. This man simply doesn't know what's good for him from start to finish. He has only thought about himself, never considering your feelings at all. My wife cried harder, her sorrow deepening until she couldn't hold back her wails. Why should I gamble decades of my remaining life on your slim chance? If you love me, should you really drag me down like this? Watching my wife weep, her words echoed in my mind. Yes, why should I gamble away decades of my remaining life for just a chance with her? At this moment, I realized how terrifyingly foolish I had been. And it was also at this moment that I finally understood my mother's well-intentioned efforts. My wife said, right now, you've already fallen into the abyss. If I had the strength to pull you up, I would. The problem is I'm truly powerless. If you keep clinging desperately to my hand, you'll only end up dragging us both down into the abyss. I forced a bitter smile and said, you're right. Since we once loved each other, we should consider each other as well being there. No need to drag the other person into the abyss. Hearing my slight concession, my wife and mother-in-law exchanged glances before eagerly saying to me, yes, it's good that you understand when I mentioned divorce today. It wasn't because I'm heartless. On the contrary, it's precisely because we loved each other that we can't let things reach that point. Just at that moment, my phone suddenly rang. It was a text message from my mother. The text message read, I've already asked around. Our old house can still fetch about $600,000, which should cover treatment for a few years. My mother-in-law glanced at the phone screen, and her expression instantly darkened. You've already contacted your mother about selling the old house, Haven to you, she demanded. My wife gasped sharply. You went behind my back to arrange selling the old house without even discussing it with me. You're truly selfish. If I hadn't brought up divorce today, would you have sold this house too? My mother-in-law exclaimed heatedly, he doesn't even consider you family. He just wants to sell the old house and move his parents, and then you'd have to wait on not just him, but 2 more elderly people. My wife bit her lip and said, I never expected you to be this kind of person. How dare you move your parents in to live with me without my consent? I replied, wait a minute, your words contradict themselves. Just now you said you'd take care of my parents if I left the house to you. But now you're asking why they should live with us. What exactly do you mean? My wife said excitedly, that would be over a decade later when my career is successful. If you move them in now, that just hinder my career progress. My mother-in-law quickly interjected, don't you dare sell this old house. Absolutely not. If you sell it now, where will my daughter live in the future? Your parents will definitely take advantage of not having a home and cling to my daughter. I forced a bitter smile and said, I truly never expected that my parents' old house, their own property, would require your permission to sell. My mother-in-law declared righteously, not only are you dragging down your own wife, you're dragging down your parents. Too, you're utterly irresponsible. Let me make this clear, your family's old house is not to be sold if you dare put up a for sale sign. I'll make such a scene every day that no buyer would dare touch it. Now I understood completely. If I were the one who'd fallen ill today, they wouldn't just take my house and half our savings. They'd forbid my parents from selling their home. Too terrified, my homeless parents might come live with them. My wife looked at me with disappointment and said, why have you become like this now? I will take care of your parents, but not at this moment. Right now is the peak of my career. If you drag me down now, how can I help your family in the future? I smiled bitterly and said, so you're saying that even though I'm sick and have spent half of my own savings, I still can't let my parents sell their house to save me? With a stern expression, my wife replied, don't make it sound so harsh. I just hope you won't only think about yourself, but also consider me and your parents. I actually felt guilty before, but now I realize divorcing you is the right decision. You're truly selfish. At this point, I felt like a complete fool. If it weren't for my mother telling me to lie, I might have really spent all my assets on this wicked woman. I sighed and said, fine, since you want a divorce, let us get divorced then. My wife exchanged glances with her mother, surprised by how easily I agreed. She quickly added, good, I hope you don't blame me. If I were the one sick today, I'd make the same choice. I asked my wife, are these truly your honest feelings? She said, of course, it's all true. If even one word is false, may I be struck by lightning. I let out a bitter laugh and said, fine, I'll sign. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law immediately became excited. She patted my shoulder and said, I knew I wasn't wrong about you from the start. You're a responsible and dependable man. My wife quickly went to fetch a pen, handing it to me. She suddenly put on a gentle face again and said, this is for the best. We loved each other so passionately before. Let us not make the ending ugly. I gave a cold laugh, then erased my wife's name from the Party A section of the contract and signed my own name instead. The smile on my wife's face gradually froze as she asked, what do you mean by this? Looking at her face, I recalled all our shared moments over the years. To be honest, I was giving her one final chance now. I said sincerely, you keep saying you're worried about being burdened, so I'm returning everything that belongs to you. Legally speaking, these are all your assets now, and since my salary is higher than yours, you're actually coming out ahead. Then I took my wife's hand and said, gently, I'm a sick man now. I want to live. Keeping these assets means I can sell them later. If needed, you won't be burdened anymore. If you ever love me, at least don't take away my hope of survival, okay? This was the last chance I gave my wife. If she agreed, it would prove her earlier words were sincere and that I'd been judging a noble person with a petty mind. If she truly were noble, then of course I'd do everything in my power to save her. Unfortunately, my wife didn't cherish this opportunity. She violently shook off my hand and screamed at me. We agreed before marriage that you'd give me a house as security. Now that I'm about to become a widow, how dare you try to take away what's rightfully mine? I watched her hysterical outburst. At this moment, all hope within me died. The dagger was finally drawn from the map. Their true intentions were revealed. Every word she had spoken earlier now seemed utterly ridiculous. My mother-in-law snatched the divorce agreement and tore it to shreds, gnashing her teeth as she spat, fine, then we'll settle this in court. Let us see how long your sickly body can hold out. With that, she hurled the torn pieces of the agreement directly in my face and snarled, you didn't appreciate it when we spoke nicely. Now that we're playing hardball, you'll learn what regret means. Starting today, I'll camp out at your family's old house every single day. Try selling it, I'll make sure you regret it. I watched their furious, flustered expressions with icy detachment. My wife then calmly took out her phone, made a call, and said, lawyer, the negotiation failed. Proceed with the lawsuit. It turns out she hadn't just prepared the divorce agreement. She even hired a lawyer. Already, no wonder she moved so fast. She must have found a professional divorce attorney. I smiled bitterly and said, so everything you just said was a lie. The sad part is I was still thinking that if you were the one going through this today, I'd move heaven and earth to save you. My mother-in-law suddenly said with sarcasm dripping from her voice, oh my, how I wish it were my daughter going through all this instead. What a pity my daughter will live to 100 while you're the one dying of cancer. I shook my head and said, since things have come to this, let us file for divorce first. The mother-in-law said excitedly, the property hasn't even been divided properly yet. How can you get divorced? But my wife quickly tugged at her mother's sleeve and said, Mom, it's fine. We can still file a property lawsuit after getting the divorce certificate. She whispered a few words into her mother-in-law's ear, and after hearing them, the older woman suddenly understood. She hurriedly told my wife, all right, then you should go apply for divorce with him right away. Watching my wife's mysterious demeanor, I already knew exactly what she was thinking. In fact, we were probably thinking about the same thing. I would be foolish enough to reveal the diagnosis report at this moment. Only the most idiotic person would present medical evidence to expose the truth now, because my wife and I had both thought of the same legal provision. Chinese marriage law explicitly stipulates that spouses have a duty to support each other. At this moment, she believes I'm already ill. If she refuses to save me, she's breaking the law. By the same token, if I don't save her, I'm also violating the law. If I were to produce the diagnosis report now, my wife would absolutely refuse divorce. So what would happen next? Given the court's usual stance, they would definitely reject my divorce petition. The court would expect me to show kindness to my wife, believing I have an obligation to support her during this difficult time, and would most likely dismiss my divorce request. At this moment, my wife and I are thinking the same thing: to get divorced as soon as possible to avoid the legal obligation of spousal support. That's why I realized only a fool would present the medical report at this stage. If the other party refuses the divorce, I'd be finished. Just as expected, after we filed for divorce at the Civil Affairs Bureau, my wife immediately disappeared. She completely cut off contact with me, spending all her time gathering evidence of assets and contacting lawyers. My mother-in-law also came to our old family house every single day, terrified that we might sell the property. I could only feel sorrow to smoothly fight the divorce lawsuit against me. She was so busy, she couldn't even spare time to go to the hospital and check her own medical examination report. During this time, I wasn't idle either. I also did something bad. I contacted lawyers everywhere, making sure my wife knew I was preparing for litigation. This made her even more anxious, completely neglecting her medical reports as she ran around frantically every day. After this tug of war, the mandatory cooling-off period for divorce finally ended. We finally got our divorce certificates. My wife tucked hers away with a cold laugh, saying, "Now we'll take our time with the lawsuit. Let us see if I could drag this out until you're ruined." I sighed and handed her the medical report, saying, "After all, we were once husband and wife. I have a gift for you." She froze for a moment and asked, "What is it?" I replied, "Remember when we went for the health checkup together? I checked with the hospital. You've been too busy to collect the results, so I picked them up for you." My wife immediately sneered. "Now that things have come to this, you're pretending to care about me again, hoping I'll go easy on you. Forget it." The mother-in-law stood by her wife's side, egging her on. "Don't believe this guy. He's just selfish. Don't go soft just because he's showing you a little concern. The lawyer told us not to be afraid, not to back down." I smiled bitterly and said, "You better take a look at this first." She snatched the medical report and began reading. As she watched, something suddenly seemed off. She frowned tightly and said, "What does this mean?" I replied, "Can't you even understand a medical report?" She snapped impatiently, "We're already divorced. Stop lecturing me with that condescending, fatherly tone. It makes me sick. Spit it out if you've got something to say." Her mother chimed in, "Exactly. You're practically a dead man walking. Quit mocking us for being uneducated with your sarcastic remarks. If you've got something to say, say it. Clearly, we're not interested in listening to your rambling." I sighed and said, "A month ago, when you were diagnosed with stomach cancer, I rushed home to persuade my parents to sell their old house to save your life, but my mother told me to first pretend I was sick to test you." Both women turned pale with shock. My wife looked at the medical report again in disbelief and said anxiously, "This can't be true. You must be lying to me. You're just trying to disgust me on purpose now." I shrugged and said, "If you don't believe me, you can go get rechecked at another hospital, but I don't think it's necessary. You don't have much money left now. You should spend it wisely and use every penny where it counts." My wife held the medical report, standing there dumbfounded and at a complete loss. The mother-in-law snatched the medical report from her hands, scrutinizing it left and right before her entire body began to tremble uncontrollably. She exclaimed in agitation, "How could it be my daughter who is sick?" I said, "Coldly handing you this medical report is the last act of kindness. I'll show you never bothered to pick it up from the hospital yourself, wasting a critical month. Honestly, you're really quite foolish. If you hadn't been so obsessed with money, fixated on hiring lawyers to sue, and had just cared a little about your own health, how could you have wasted so much time?" After I finished speaking, I turned to leave, and at that very moment the mother-in-law burst into uncontrollable sobs. My wife grabbed my arm, her voice trembling, as she pleaded, "Wait, you can't go. I won't divorce you anymore." She hastily threw the divorce certificate back onto the counter and urgently said to the staff, "We're not getting divorced anymore. Please help us withdraw the application now." The staff member said, "Helplessly, the documents have already been processed and returned to both of you. How could it be possible to withdraw now? What were you doing during the 1-month cooling-off period?" My wife anxiously pleaded, "We can't get divorced. I've changed my mind. Hurry up and help us remarry." I shook off my wife's hand and said calmly, "Even if you want to remarry, I don't agree. Besides, you were the one who initiated the divorce. And now you want to remarry, changing your mind on a whim? What exactly do you take marriage for?" Her tears gushed out instantly as she grabbed my hand and sobbed, "How could you do such a thing? You know I'm sick. Why would you divorce me now?" I stared at her in disbelief. "Maybe you should listen to yourself. I said, weren't you the one who insisted that since you're sick we should divorce, so I wouldn't be burdened for the rest of my life?" "It's not the same," she wailed. The double standard was showing. I rolled my eyes. I truly couldn't see how this was any different. Then I turned to leave again, but she quickly grabbed my arm once more and said anxiously, "You can't go. You have to marry me right now. We loved each other so passionately before. How can you abandon me in my hardest time?" My mother-in-law also chimed in excitedly, "That's right, my daughter loved you so much before, and who says cancer can't be cured? There's still a chance of recovery." I sneered and said, "Why should I gamble the rest of my life on your slim odds?" My wife, furious, shouted, "If you walk away today, will sue you, will fight you to the end. I shrugged and said, nonchalantly, no problem, go ahead and sue me. Let us see how many years you could drag this out. By the time you die from your illness, I'll just take your elderly parents to court. Please don't go. In her desperation, my wife actually knelt right in front of me, clutching my hand. She pleaded pitifully, I was foolish before, please, for the sake of the love we once shared, don't abandon me when I need you most. Watching her pitiful expression, I felt that same chilling disgust rise in me again. I said, when I first found out you were sick, I tried everything to save you, but it was you and your mother who insisted that the sick shouldn't burden their partner. You even went to my parents to make trouble, refusing to let me sell the old house. Wasn't this exactly the outcome you wanted? My wife trembled with tears streaming down her face. It's different. The situation was different back then. I said earnestly, please keep your promise. You told me many times that if you were the one who got sick, you'd never burden me. Don't be so selfish. Think about me too. In her desperation, my mother-in-law blocked my way, pointing at me. She shouted angrily, you heartless man, your wife has cancer, and you're leaving her. How could there be someone as morally bankrupt as you in this world? She spoke so loudly as if trying to draw everyone's attention. The sad part was our earlier conversation hadn't been quiet either, and everyone present already understood exactly what was going on. The looks people gave them held not a trace of sympathy, even carrying a hint of mockery. I said, get lost, a good dog doesn't block the path. My mother-in-law was furious. She raised her hand, poised to slap me across the face. I said coldly, go ahead and hit me. Your family needs money right now. If you dare lay a hand on me, I'll collapse right here. Let us see if you can afford to pay for it. She glared at me fiercely, but ultimately lowered her hand, softening her tone as she pleaded, we were wrong. Before do I need to kneel here and kowtow to you before you'll agree to remarry my daughter? I paused for a moment, then replied, that might be worth considering. Hearing this, my mother-in-law immediately dropped to her knees before me, repeatedly knocking her head against the floor frantically. She begged, it's all her fault. We were foolish. Before, please, I beg you, say my daughter, our family, has no money left. She'll die without help. I watched as my mother-in-law knelt before me and kowtowed, feeling nothing but amusement. After finishing her kowtows, she looked at me expectantly and said, now can you remarry my daughter? With a straight face, I replied, I've made up my mind. I want to remarry her. Her expression instantly darkened, and she shouted angrily, how dare you make a fool of me? I shrugged and said, nonchalantly, I made it very clear to you from the beginning. I would only consider it carefully. After thinking it over, I decided I don't want to remarry. Is there a problem? If you're not happy about it, you can hit me. My mother-in-law turned livid with rage. But in this situation, she didn't dare lay a hand on me. My wife completely broke down, emotionally sobbing. She said to me, was it really necessary to treat my family like this? You know I'm dying, and yet you still humiliate me and my mom. I replied, I only humiliated you, but when you thought I was about to die, you wanted to destroy me. She cried, no, I never wanted to destroy you. I just thought at least one of us should live a good life. I nodded and said, I agree, that's why I want to live. Well, now congratulations on convincing me. What a fool I was to ever think of saving you. My mother-in-law roared in anger. You knew your wife had cancer, but kept silent. That's illegal. I replied, go ahead and report me to the police. She never bothered to check her own medical report. Not my damn problem. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving my wife and her mother standing there dumbstruck. Things didn't end so easily. I had underestimated the shamelessness of this mother-daughter pair. After learning I was adamant about not remarrying, they actually started playing dirty. First, they wailed to the neighbors at my doorstep. Then they even made a scene in my workplace, unfurling banners to accuse me of abandoning my cancer-stricken wife, practically trying to ruin my reputation. My workplace called me in for a talk. After understanding the full situation, they all sympathized with me. The boss personally sought me out, saying he'd transfer me to a position at an out-of-town branch, and even suggested I sell my house to cut ties with these kinds of people. I figured the boss was right. These two women had turned completely unhinged if they later realized the illness was incurable and came at me with a knife, trying to take me down with them. Wouldn't I'd be the one suffering in the end. My company was decent enough to transfer me to a branch office in another city, publicly claiming I'd been fired. I took my parents and fled from the mess, making sure no one knew her new address. As for the marital home and the old family house, I put both up for sale. In situations like this, the best approach is to get as far away as possible. There's no point in tangling with these kind of lunatics. However, my ex-wife didn't give up on dragging me to court. The progress of such civil disputes is often slow. By the time the court hearing began, I finally saw her again. She had become emaciated, sitting in the courtroom and crying as she accused me to the judge he abandoned me when I needed help the most. Now, I just hope the court can uphold justice for me, either declare our divorce invalid or grant me that house. I'm just a poor woman trying to survive. She wept bitterly, but I had long prepared my evidence. I presented our home surveillance footage to the court. The judge frowned while watching it, then said to my wife, "You were the one who initiated the divorce correct back when you thought he was the one who was sick." My wife cried and said that different. He a man with a higher income than me at the time. I thought that, as an ordinary woman, I couldn't take good care of him, nor could I afford his medical expenses, so divorce was the better choice. The judge asked then, "Why do you think now that you're sick he wouldn't dare divorce you?" My wife replied, "I've already said it. Because he has a higher income, he should naturally take care of me. I'm already a dying person. Even if I made mistakes, they don't deserve a death sentence, right? I'm just an ordinary woman. When faced with difficulties, I would panic and make wrong decisions. I hope the court can give me a chance to make amends." The judge said calmly, "I'm also a woman, but I don't agree with your reasoning." Finally, the court has ruled. The court determined that the property was purchased before marriage, and my wife has no right to claim any share of it. As for our marital assets acquired after marriage, they are considered joint property to be divided equally between us. However, based on humanitarian principles, the court ordered me to pay 50,000 yuan, which is already the best outcome possible. Losing 50,000 yuan is still better than losing this house. But my wife wasn't satisfied. She cried, "I won't accept this. I'll appeal. What can 50,000 yuan even do for me?" Suddenly, it occurred to me, maybe my mother-in-law was right. I'm still young. If I spend all our family savings trying to save my wife, but fail in the end, how would I live the rest of my life? I have my mother-in-law said excitedly, "You've already kept the house. What right do you have to appeal?" I shrugged and said, "This is the solution you mother and daughter came up with for me. I can keep appealing, dragging it out until your daughter dies. By then, when she is dead, humanitarian compensation, 50,000 yuan anymore. The funeral expenses will only cost you a few thousand at most." My mother-in-law gasped, finally breaking down with a scream. "How can you be so vicious?" Am I vicious? To be honest, I don't think so. There was a time when I thought my wife was sick and I was willing to give everything to save her. But when I realized she was my beloved but my enemy, I couldn't afford to be soft-hearted toward my enemy. The judge asked if I wanted to file an appeal. I just smiled and shook my head because I knew there was a time limit for appeals. I only needed to submit it at the very last moment. I had only one decision, and that was to stall. Just like the tactic this mother-daughter pair had initially planned to use against me. In the end, my wife didn't survive until the next court hearing. Her family had little money to begin with, and the prolonged legal battle drained both their resources and energy. Her condition deteriorated rapidly. On the day she died, when I heard the news, I couldn't help but sigh. After all, we once loved each other passionately, but I never imagined that even with such intense love, I could have been so blind. I just want to advise everyone in this world to be kinder to themselves, not to foolishly sacrifice and move themselves because the other person might not be worthy of your devotion. Some men, no matter how good their wives are to them, will ultimately choose younger women. Some women, no matter how good their husbands are to them, will ultimately betray their men. I'm not advocating for fear of marriage. I just want to remind everyone that while giving selflessly, always leave yourself an escape route.